January 6, 1982, the Rocky Mountains, Colorado. Two women, same night, same town, both gone by morning. One clue sat in an evidence bag for 6 months before anyone understood what it meant. An orange sock. By the end of this story, you'll know exactly how that sock connected two murders, and how the killer spent 38 years living as a free man before it caught up to him. Breckenridge, Colorado is a ski town. In January 1982, it is a small, tight-knit community tucked into the mountains at over 9,000 feet. People know each other. People trust each other. And when the weather turns bad and the roads ice over, people hitchhike. It is common. It is accepted. On any given evening, you can see somebody standing on the shoulder of a mountain road with a thumb out, waiting for a ride home. That is the kind of place Breckenridge is in 1982. It is also the kind of place where two women can vanish within hours of each other, and no one connects it for months. On the evening of January 6th, a blizzard rolls into the area. Temperatures plunge to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind is brutal. The roads are barely passable. At approximately 4:45 that afternoon, a 21-year-old woman named Annette Schnee leaves a drugstore in Breckenridge. Annette works as a housekeeper at the local Holiday Inn. She has just visited a doctor and picked up some medication. She is hitchhiking south, heading home. After 4:45, no one sees her again. 3 hours later, at a pub in Breckenridge, a 29-year-old woman named Bobby Jo Oberholzer is finishing drinks with friends. Bobby Jo is married. Her husband, Jeff, is at home. At 6:21 that evening, Bobby Jo calls Jeff from the pub. She tells him she has a ride and will be home soon. That is the last time Jeff Oberholzer hears his wife's voice. After leaving the pub around 7:50, Bobby Jo steps outside into the blizzard and begins hitchhiking south along the same road Annette had traveled hours earlier. Jeff falls asleep on the couch watching television. He wakes up around midnight. Bobby Jo is not home. He goes out looking for her, driving the roads between Breckenridge and their house. He finds nothing. He contacts the Breckenridge police and tries to report her missing. They tell him they cannot do anything for 24 hours. Jeff goes home and waits. Early the next morning, January 7th, Jeff receives a phone call from a rancher in the area. The rancher says he found Bobby Jo's driver's license on his property. Jeff rushes out. On the way, he spots something on the side of the road. Bobby Jo's distinctive blue backpack. He stops. Near the backpack, he finds her right glove and a tissue. Both have traces of blood on them. The blood, Jeff assumes, belongs to his wife. He is wrong. That blood belongs to someone else entirely. But it will be 38 years before anyone knows whose it is. Later that morning, worried friends organize a search party. They strap on skis and fan out across the snow-covered terrain near Hoosier Pass, a high mountain road south of Breckenridge. Around 3 in the afternoon, they find her. Bobby Jo Oberholzer is lying in a snowbank off the side of the road. She has been shot and killed. A pair of plastic zip ties are around one of her wrists. She is fully clothed. An autopsy will later confirm she was not sexually assaulted. Near her body, investigators recover 2 items. The first is a large brass key ring, heavy, handmade. Jeff Oberholzer identifies it immediately. He had made it for Bobby Jo himself. He knew she hitchhiked. He knew the risks, so he had crafted her a weapon. A thick brass clip with a heavy ring, something she could swing at an attacker if she ever needed to defend herself. Finding it near her body means one thing: Bobby Jo had tried to use it. The second item is stranger. Lying in the snow not far from Bobby Jo's body is a single orange sock. It does not belong to Bobby Jo. No one at the scene has any idea where it came from or what it means. Agent Jim Hartke of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation picks it up and bags it. He files it away as one of those mysterious things you keep at a crime scene until you understand it, or never do. Think about what investigators have at this point. A young woman shot to death in the snow. Zip ties on her wrist, meaning someone had restrained her before she died. A brass key ring near her body, a weapon she had tried to use. A bloody glove and a tissue found on the roadside by her own husband, and one orange sock lying in the snow a few feet from where Bobby Joe's body lay that did not belong to her, did not belong to anyone they knew, and had no business being on that mountain pass in the middle of a January blizzard. The sock made no sense. It connected to nothing. But Agent Hartke bagged it anyway and filed it into evidence, because that is what you do with things you cannot explain. You hold on to them and hope they explain themselves later. Now investigators needed a suspect, and from the very first hours of the case, one name rose to the surface faster than any other. Jeff Oberholzer, the husband. He was the last person known to have spoken with Bobby Joe, that phone call at 6:21 from the pub, where she told him she had a ride home. He said he fell asleep on the couch watching television and did not realize she was missing until midnight. His alibi was a living room sofa. No one could verify it, no one could contradict it. It was just Jeff, alone, in a house his wife never came back to. And then there was the matter of the evidence he found. Jeff was the one who spotted Bobby Joe's blue backpack on the roadside. Jeff was the one who picked up her glove and the bloody tissue. He found these things before the police did. To detectives working the case, that raised a question that would not go away. How did the husband know where to look? Why was he the one finding evidence at the scene? Jeff told them the truth. A rancher had called him about finding Bobby Joe's license. Jeff had driven out to find her, and on the way he spotted the backpack and the glove on the shoulder of the road. It was instinct. It was love. It was desperation. But to investigators working a murder case with no witnesses and no leads, it looked like something else entirely. Jeff Oberholzer became suspect number one. Not publicly, not formally, but in the files, in the interviews, in the whispers around Breckenridge, Jeff was the man people looked at when they talked about who killed Bobby Joe. Jeff would later describe the years that followed as a slow, burning nightmare. People in the community avoided him. He was tried, as he put it, in the court of public opinion. Neighbors did not want a suspected murderer in their homes. Friends drifted away. And through all of it, Jeff stayed. He stayed in Breckenridge. He stayed near the place where his wife had been murdered. He stayed because leaving would have looked like running, and running would have looked like guilt. So he stayed, and he waited. For 40 years. Investigators had a suspect, but they did not have evidence. No DNA tied Jeff to the crime. No physical evidence placed him at the murder scene. No witness saw him anywhere near Hoosier Pass that night. The case against Jeff Oberholzer was built entirely on suspicion and proximity. And suspicion and proximity are not enough to charge a man with murder. The investigation stalled. And then, 2 days after Bobby Joe's body was found, another threat appeared. On January 8, 1982, a co-worker at the Holiday Inn in Frisco called the police. Annette Schnee had not come to work in 2 days. That was extremely unlike her. Her sister, Cindy French, knew it too. Annette was reliable, responsible, not the kind of person who disappeared without a word. Police traced her last known movements to the Breckenridge drugstore on the afternoon of January 6th. She had picked up medication. She had walked out. After 4:45 that afternoon, no one saw Annette Schnee alive again. She had been hitchhiking south, in the same direction Bobby Joe had traveled 3 hours later. Same town, same road, same night. Same method of travel. 2 women who did not know each other, vanishing from the same stretch of highway within hours. Investigators suspected a connection. But suspecting a connection and proving one are 2 very different things. There was no physical evidence linking the 2 disappearances. No witness who saw both women get into the same vehicle. No common acquaintance. Just a date on a calendar and a direction on a road. Before we get to what happened next, if this is the kind of story that keeps you watching, hit subscribe. Because what investigators found 6 months later changed everything about this case. And it had been sitting in an evidence bag the entire time. The months passed, Winter gave way to spring. Spring turned to summer. Annette Schnee remained missing. Her mother called the police regularly, asking if there was any news. There never was. Cindy French remembered her mother saying the same thing over and over. "I just want to know why, and how, and nobody can give it to me. Nobody knows." The Oberholzer case remained open. Jeff remained under suspicion. The orange sock remained in a bag in an evidence locker, unexplained, unconnected, unremarkable. Then, on July 3, 1982, nearly 6 months after Annette disappeared, a young boy out fishing along a stream in a remote area of Park County stumbled onto something in the water. A body. It was Annette Schnee. She was approximately 23 miles from where she had last been seen in Breckenridge. The forensic examination told a brutal story. Annette had been shot in the back. The trajectory indicated she had been running downhill, away from her attacker, toward the stream, when the bullet struck her. The zipper on her jeans was broken. Her shoes were on the wrong feet. Agent Hartke suspected she had been sexually assaulted, though the condition of her body after 6 months in water made it impossible to confirm definitively. Agent Hartke, the same CBI investigator who had worked the Oberholzer scene in January, attended the autopsy. He stood in the room as the examination proceeded, and then he saw something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. On Annette Schnee's left foot was an orange sock, a bright, distinctive orange bootie. The same style, the same size, the same unusual color. Hartke knew instantly. He had seen that color before. 6 months earlier, in the snow near Bobby Joe Oberholzer's body. The orange sock that had sat in an evidence bag since January, the one that belonged to no one, that connected to nothing, that made no sense at all, had a match. And it was on the foot of a woman who had disappeared from the same town on the same night, 3 hours before Bobby Joe. Annette's mother would later confirm that the orange socks were a Christmas present. She had given them to Annette just a few weeks before her daughter vanished. A gift from a mother to her daughter for the holidays. The last gift she would ever give her. Hartke understood the timeline immediately. Phillips, though his name was not yet known, had picked up Annette first. Sometime during whatever happened in that vehicle, one of Annette's orange socks came off and was left behind in the truck. Hours later, the same man picked up Bobby Joe. When Bobby Joe fought back, broke free of the zip ties, and leapt from the vehicle, the orange sock that had been left by Annette was kicked or knocked out of the truck, landing in the snow near the spot where Bobby Joe would be shot and killed. One sock on the first victim's foot, the other at the second victim's crime scene. The only explanation was that both women had been inside the same vehicle. Both had encountered the same man. Both had been killed by the same person. 2 murders, 1 killer, and he was still out there. But knowing there was a single predator and identifying him were 2 entirely different problems. In 1982, there was no DNA profiling technology available to law enforcement. The blood on Bobby Joe's glove could be typed. It was not Bobby Joe's blood type, but it could not be matched to a specific individual. There were no fingerprints, no surviving witnesses, no one who had seen either woman get into a vehicle that night. The murder weapon was never recovered. The case had physical evidence, the sock, the glove, the blood, the zip ties, the key ring, but none of it pointed to a name. The years accumulated. 5 years passed with no arrest, then 10, then 20. Investigators who had worked the original case retired. New detectives inherited the files. The boxes of evidence moved from one storage room to another. The community in Breckenridge grew, changed, forgot. Jeff Oberholzer remained in the area, still carrying the weight of suspicion, still waiting for someone to find the truth. Annette's family waited too. Her mother kept asking why. No one had an answer. 30 years after the murders, the case was as cold as the night it happened, and it might have stayed that way forever, if not for a detective who heard about a new kind of science. In early 2020, Park County Detective Sergeant Wendy Kipple learned about genetic genealogy. The process works like this. DNA from a crime scene is uploaded to publicly available genealogy databases, the kind ordinary people use to trace their ancestry and find distant relatives. Specially trained genealogists then build family trees from the matches, working backward through generations until they narrow down a list of possible suspects. The technique had already produced dramatic results in other cold cases across the country, most notably the identification of the Golden State Killer in California. Kipple pulled the evidence from the Oberholzer case. The blood on Bobby Joe's glove, the blood that was not Bobby Joe's, the blood that had been sitting in storage for 38 years, was submitted to United Data Connect, a genetic genealogy firm in Denver. The sample was uploaded. The algorithms went to work. On January 9, 2021, the genealogist called Kipple with results. 2 names, 2 brothers, Alan Phillips and Bruce Phillips. Bruce Phillips had no connection to Colorado. He had never lived there. He had no ties to Breckenridge or the surrounding mountain communities. Alan Phillips was a different story entirely. Alan Lee Phillips had worked at the Henderson mine near Breckenridge for decades. He had operated a mechanic shop. He had lived in Dumont, a small community in Clear Creek County, less than an hour's drive from where both women were last seen alive. And he was still there. 39 years after the murders, the man whose DNA matched the blood on Bobby Joe's glove was living in the same mountains where he had killed 2 women. Investigators needed a direct DNA sample from Alan Phillips to confirm the match. They could not compel him to provide one without tipping him off. So they watched him, they followed him, and they waited. One day, 70-year-old Alan Lee Phillips walked out of a Sonic drive-thru restaurant and tossed a drink cup into the trash. Detectives retrieved the cup. The DNA on the rim was tested against the blood from Bobby Joe's glove. It matched. The blood that Bobby Joe had drawn from her attacker, using the brass weapon her husband Jeff had made for her, was confirmed to be the blood of Alan Lee Phillips. 38 years. The answer had been on that glove the entire time, sitting in an evidence locker, waiting for the science to catch up to what Bobby Joe Oberholzer already knew the moment she swung that brass ring into her attacker's face. To understand what Alan Phillips did on the night of January 6, 1982, you have to go back to who he was and how that evening unfolded. Phillips was 30 years old, a miner at the Henderson mine, a mechanic. He lived in the mountain communities west of Denver and knew every road, every pass, every back route through the Rockies. He drove a pickup truck. On the afternoon of January 6th, as the blizzard descended on Breckenridge, investigators believe Phillips was on the road, and he was hunting. At approximately 4:45 that afternoon, Annette Schnee left the drugstore in Breckenridge and began hitchhiking south. Investigators believe Phillips picked her up in his truck. What happened next is not fully known, but the evidence presented at trial told a devastating story. At some point, Annette was taken from the vehicle and led or forced into a remote area near a stream, roughly 23 miles from town. She tried to run. She was shot in the back as she fled downhill toward the water. She fell face down in the stream. During whatever had occurred inside the truck, one of her orange socks had come off and remained in the vehicle. Several hours later, around 7:50 that evening, Bobby Joe Oberholzer left the pub in Breckenridge and began hitchhiking south along the same road. Investigators believe Phillips picked her up. He restrained her with plastic zip ties around her wrists. But Bobby Joe Oberholzer was not a woman who would go quietly. She fought. She broke free of the restraints. She grabbed the brass key ring Jeff had made for her, the weapon she carried for exactly this kind of moment, and she struck Phillips in the face hard enough to split the skin and leave a deep bruise. She leapt from the truck. As she did, the orange sock that Annette had left behind in the vehicle was kicked or knocked out with her, tumbling into the snow near the roadside. Phillips chased Bobby Joe down in the darkness and the blizzard. He shot her in the chest. He left her body in a snowbank off Hoosier Pass. And then he ran. But not in a direction that made sense. Instead of heading back toward his home by the most logical route, Phillips turned onto Guanella Pass, a 22-mile stretch of road that climbs to 11,600 feet through the Rocky Mountains. The road was not maintained in winter. In a blizzard, it was impassable. Phillips drove into it anyway. His pickup truck plowed into a snowdrift and buried itself. He was stuck, trapped at over 10,000 feet in elevation. -20 degrees, wind howling, snow falling thick enough to obscure his own hand in front of his face. He had a light jacket and a small blanket. Without help, he would be dead by morning. Phillips began flashing his headlights in a pattern. On, off, on, off. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. He aimed them straight up into the sky, signaling to anything and anyone above. It was a desperate, almost hopeless act. The chance of someone in an aircraft seeing a flashing light through a blizzard at night over an unmaintained mountain road was essentially zero. But on a commercial flight climbing out of Denver that evening, a man in the front right window seat happened to look down. His name was Harold Bray. He was the sheriff of Jefferson County, the county directly east of where Guanella Pass cuts through the mountains. Bray knew the area, he knew the pass, and he knew what he was seeing. A light flashing SOS from a place where no one should be. Bray unbuckled his seatbelt. He climbed over the passenger next to him. He flagged down the flight attendant and explained that he was a sheriff and that someone was signaling distress from the Guanella Pass. The crew took him seriously. They entered the cockpit and radioed authorities on the ground. 15 minutes later, local fire chief Dave Montoya drove his 4-wheel drive SUV up the pass through the blizzard. He found Phillips' truck buried in the snow. He walked to the driver's side window. Inside was a man he recognized. Montoya had worked alongside Phillips in the mines. Phillips was shaking, terrified, slightly intoxicated, wrapped in a thin blanket. And on the left side of his face was a large, deep bruise. Montoya asked about it. Phillips smiled, an embarrassed kind of smile, and told a story. He said he had gotten out of the truck to urinate, lost his bearings in the whiteout conditions, and run face first into the door of his own truck trying to find it again. Montoya accepted it. He loaded Phillips into his SUV and drove him to safety. The next morning, the local newspapers ran the story. The headline called it "The Miracle at Guanella Pass." A stranded motorist saved from certain death by a 1 in a million sighting from a commercial airplane. A sheriff with the right seat on the right flight at the right moment. A feel-good story for a bitter winter. The miracle was a lie. The man they had rescued that night had, hours earlier, killed 2 women and left their bodies in the snow. The bruise on his face was not from running into his truck. It was from Bobby Jo Oberholzer, who had swung a heavy brass key ring into his face as she fought for her life. And the only reason Phillips was on the Guanella Pass at all was because he was fleeing the area where he had just committed 2 murders, and he did not know the road was closed for winter. The authorities who rescued Alan Phillips that night had no idea what he had done. They shook his hand. They drove him to warmth. They told the newspapers about the miracle. And then Alan Phillips went home. He went back to work at the mine. He kept running his mechanic shop. He lived in the same mountains, drove the same roads, passed through the same towns where Annette and Bobby Jo had taken their last rides. For 38 years, he lived as a free man. He aged. He became a grandfather. He blended into the community so completely that when Detective Kipple received his name from the genealogist in 2021, she had to look him up. He was right there. He had been right there the entire time. In February 2021, Alan Lee Phillips was arrested at the age of 70. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of felony murder, and 2 counts of kidnapping. In September 2022, a Park County jury convicted him on all counts. The deliberation lasted 4 hours and 45 minutes. On November 7, 2022, he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. At sentencing, Phillips said nothing. He did not apologize. He did not explain. He did not acknowledge what he had done. Jeff Oberholzer was in the courtroom. 40 years of suspicion, 40 years of whispers, 40 years of being looked at as the man who might have killed his wife. And now, finally, a jury had said the word guilty, and it was not his name attached to it. The blood his wife had drawn from her attacker's face had spoken for her across 4 decades. The brass keyring Jeff had made for Bobby Joe, the weapon he gave her because he worried about her safety when she hitchhiked, had done exactly what he built it to do. It had fought back, and even though it could not save her life that night, it had, in the end, identified her killer. On February 27, 2023, less than 4 months after his sentencing, Alan Lee Phillips was found dead in his prison cell. He died by his own hand. He was 71 years old. He never confessed to the murders of Annette Schnee and Bobby Joe Oberholzer. He never explained why he targeted 2 women on the same night. He never disclosed whether there were other victims. Investigators have stated publicly that they believe Annette and Bobby Joe may not have been his only victims, and that investigation continues. The answers Phillips carried with him are gone. The case is known today as the Orange Sock Murders. 2 bright orange socks, a Christmas gift from a mother to her 21-year-old daughter in December 1981, became the thread that stitched 2 separate murder investigations into one. One sock traveled from Annette's foot into a killer's truck and out into the snow beside another woman's body. The other stayed on Annette's foot for 6 months, in a stream in the cold Colorado water, until a boy with a fishing rod found her and Agent Hartke walked into the autopsy and saw the color and remembered. Annette Schnee was 21 years old. She worked at the Holiday Inn. She had just picked up her medication and was trying to get home before the blizzard got worse. Bobby Joe Oberholzer was 29. She had called her husband from a pub and told him she would be home soon. Neither of them made it home that night. But Bobby Joe fought back hard enough to leave a mark, hard enough to draw blood. And that blood, on a glove found by her husband on the shoulder of a frozen road, survived 38 Colorado winters in an evidence locker until the science built a bridge between a drop of blood and a name. The orange socks Annette's mother gave her for Christmas were the last gift her daughter ever received. One of them ended up in a killer's truck. The other ended up on her daughter's foot in a stream where she lay for 6 months before anyone found her. They were just socks. A small, warm, ordinary thing a mother gives a child. But they were the thing that connected everything. 2 women, 2 crime scenes, 2 families, and 40 years of silence. And finally made it impossible for a 70-year-old man in a quiet mountain town to pretend he had never done what he did. If you had to carry the weight of being wrongly suspected for 40 years, the way Jeff Oberholzer did, while knowing the truth was sitting in an evidence locker the entire time, what would that do to you? And when that jury finally said guilty, and it was not your name, what would that moment feel like after 4 decades of waiting? Some cases go cold because the evidence is destroyed. Some go cold because the killer is clever. And some go cold because the answer was there all along, sitting in a bag, tagged and cataloged and filed away, waiting patiently for the rest of the world to build a machine smart enough to read it. That machine exists now. And there are other bags, in other lockers, in other cities, with other names waiting inside them. The question is not whether the science will get there. It already has. The question is, whose name comes next?